I want you to picture this. You're kicking back in your room. You're on your third hour of a YouTube binge watch. Your butt's happy in that spot and doesn't plan on moving. And all of a sudden, your roommate busts in and is like, hey, there's a fire in the kitchen. And so you jump up and that's when it hits you. Your heart is beating way faster than it should. You feel exceptionally lightheaded. And even though your house is on fire, you need to sit down like right now. Folks who've experienced that sensation too severely may have POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and it's not their fault. POTS is a type of dysautonomia, a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, that portion of the nervous system that controls some of those bodily functions that run in the background, like heart rate, breathing, even pupil dilation. And diseases in this system range from deadly to mildly annoying. So, what do we need to know about our body's autopilot mode? What's up and welcome to another anatomy and physiology lesson. My name is Patrick and today we're talking about the autonomic nervous system. This is one of those parts of physiology that you're going to use regardless of whether you go into medicine, how drugs work, or even fitness. Everyone needs to know how the autonomic nervous system works. So we start where we always do, the big picture. The autonomic nervous system takes care of those bodily functions that happen without you even thinking of them. Obviously, examples are coming. If you've been keeping up with this series, you know that the nervous system has two main functions: sense things and move things. We call these sensory nerves and motor nerves. And we have two ways that we can tell our body to move, either voluntarily or involuntarily. The deliberate, voluntary movement falls within the somatic nervous system. When you lift that tasty burrito up to your mouth, you're doing that voluntarily. That falls under somatic control. But some things happened automatically during burrito time. You started salivating, a couple of hormones were released, and your stomach got ready to welcome the incoming burrito.
This is what your Patreon money goes to, by the way.
All the functions of the autonomic nervous system are motor, and those automatic functions can be a bunch of different things. But in general, they fall into the excited fight or flight category, what's called the sympathetic nervous system, or the more chill rest and digest category, the parasympathetic nervous system. Technically, there's a third enteric nervous system that plays a role in digestion. Not surprising considering enteric is Greek for intestine. I'm not gonna cover that in this video, but just so you know, it's a thing. So broadly speaking, you have the speed up and the slow down, the punk rock and the R&B, the salsa picante and the mint chip ice cream, the high-strung type A and the libertarian who just needs them to chill out for like a second. To get a bit more scientific, the sympathetic nervous system is way more active during high-stress situations and gets you ready to move. This means speeding up your heart rate, stimulating sweat production, dilating your pupils to let more light in, and stimulating glucose production and release from the liver. I mean, after all, something stressful is happening. You might need to run away from a bear or from the crushing anxiety about your student debt. But while it's stoking certain organs for exercise, it's also inhibiting other functions that don't need to be active during stress. Right, when you're running away from a bear, you don't want to worry about digesting food, and you definitely don't want to stop to pee, at least while the stressor is there. On the other hand, your parasympathetic nervous system does the opposite. It slows down heart rate and stimulates the stomach to digest food and for your bladder to drain. So while these two systems seem like they're evenly balanced like all things should be, the sympathetic nervous system actually encompasses way more anatomy. It attaches to blood vessels and sweat glands while the parasympathetic doesn't hook into the skin or musculoskeletal system at all. So overall, it's a much bigger system than the parasympathetic. But hold up, we've been talking about these systems as kind of abstract ideas up until now. So what exact pieces of anatomy are we talking about when we learn about these systems? This is the point where if you haven't watched my other nervous system videos, you might want to pause this video and watch those. We're about to go pretty highbrow. Okay, so we have a central nervous system with a brain and spinal cord in it, right? And that spinal cord has a bunch of different branches off of it that make up the peripheral nervous system. Both branches of the autonomic nervous system have roughly the same structure, a kind of a two-piece setup that we'll zoom in on. We have the spinal cord, a neuron that plugs into something called a ganglion, and another neuron that connects to the target organ, anything from the pupils to the colon. We call the connection from spinal cord to ganglion the preganglionic neuron, while the postganglionic neuron connects ganglion to organ. You have these bilaterally, so on both your left and right sides. And in both the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, once an action potential travels down the myelinated preganglionic neuron, it releases a specific neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, or ACH, to the ganglion. Depending on what organ it's going to, the postganglionic neuron might release acetylcholine again, or norepinephrine to its target. And we'll just mention this right now because I'm sure it's coming in the comments, but norepinephrine can be both a neurotransmitter between neurons, but it can also be a hormone in the bloodstream. The context is everything. So that's the general context of our autonomic neurons, but there are some exceptions. Like the sympathetic nervous system can take one of those myelinated, super fast preganglionic neurons, bypass the ganglion entirely, and hook it up directly to chromaffin cells in the adrenal gland, which release excitatory hormones into the bloodstream. Unfortunately for your poor, sleep-deprived student brains, there are some differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions that you're gonna have to know. Look, I know, I can hear you groan from here, but luckily because I love you so much, I limited it to 2 differences. The first is their general location off of the spinal cord. Sympathetic neurons have a cell body in the lateral gray column of the spinal cord, this spot here, and branch out from thoracic vertebrae 1 to lumbar vertebrae 2, so kind of a middle chunk of the spinal cord. And from there, those preganglionic neurons can go superiorly or inferiorly to different ganglia. Or they could go to ganglia that have fused together. For example, the last cervical ganglion and the first thoracic ganglion fuse into something called the stellate ganglion. Side note, I found out that some surgeons will actually sever the stellate ganglion in cases where the person's hands are extremely sweaty. I guess it pays to sweat the small stuff. But there are a bunch of plexuses and other bundles of nerves too. Like you've probably heard of the solar plexus before, this cluster of nerves and ganglia located in the chest. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, branches out of the head and pelvis. We're talking cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10, and sacral roots 2, 3, and 4. So it makes a vertebral sandwich with the sympathetic nerve roots. It makes sense when you know what they do. Like cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve, has motor control of the eye, so it can constrict the pupil. Or cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, which is the big deal parasympathetic nerve that can slow down heart rate or stimulate digestion. Then the sacral nerve roots are for bladder and genital stuff. Big difference number 2 is what kind of receptors those postganglionic neurons use. Remember, all the preganglionic neurons for both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems just spit out acetylcholine, so we call those cholinergic neurons. And since neurotransmitters are just fancy locks and keys, an acetylcholine neurotransmitter fits into a cholinergic receptor. 2 types of those, either nicotinic or muscarinic receptors. But it's a little different for postganglionic neurons. In the parasympathetic nervous system, their postganglionic neurons usually spit out more acetylcholine, so it's another cholinergic neuron. Sympathetic postganglionic neurons are another story. They mostly release norepinephrine to something called an adrenergic receptor. Sometimes these neurons pump out more acetylcholine, but in general, they pump out norepinephrine. And within those adrenergic receptors, you can have alpha-1 and beta-1 receptors that kick off excitation of a neuron, and alpha-2 and beta-2 receptors that inhibit the target tissue. By the way, I made these graphics into a little PDF that you can find down in the doobly-doo if you need a little extra help. The easiest way to remember that is that adrenergic has word overlap with adrenaline, which is where it gets its name from. Obviously, you can tie together adrenaline and excitation, which is perfect because that's what our sympathetic nervous system does. So we've got cholinergic receptors for acetylcholine and adrenergic receptors for norepinephrine and epinephrine. And this is important when you remember that neurons have a bunch of different types of channels that can let different ions in, including something called ligand-gated ion channels, receptors on the neuron that are opened by chemicals. This lets sodium and calcium into the channel, which excites the neuron and triggers an action potential, kinda like ion-gated channels did. Let's take a look at a concrete example though, probably the most important subject of autonomic innervation, the heart. Your little cardiac muscle has sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation. And remember our 2-piece setup, preganglionic and postganglionic neurons. For the sympathetic innervation of the heart, the preganglionic neurons come out from thoracic roots 1 through 4. This lines up with the same model we saw earlier, plus T1 through 4 is right about where your heart is anyway. Their ganglia are your typical paravertebral ganglia running alongside the spine, then branching out to postganglionic neurons to the heart. And because we're looking at sympathetic postganglionic neurons, we're working with adrenergic receptors. We've got beta-1s in the sinoatrial and atrioventricular nodes, those pacemaker cells in the heart, and beta-1s are excitatory, which means they can get that heart rate up there, ready for exercise. But, and I think this is dope, it's also stimulating some beta-2 receptors, which means that something has to relax. Exactly what we want our blood vessels to do during exercise. This is the process of vasodilation. The tiny muscles around blood vessels relax, which increases blood delivery. So after sympathetic stimulation, heart rate increases, force of contraction increases, which means we can squeeze blood out more forcefully. Even the electrical signal itself can be conducted faster, but it will slow down eventually. And our big player there in the parasympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve, good old cranial nerve 10. See, the vagus nerve also plugs into the SA node and AV node, and when it stimulates either of those nodes, heart rate slows down. There's a ton I'm not covering there about the heart's electrical system, but that would be like a 90-minute video. Now, if you want to learn more about the intersection between the nervous system and the musculoskeletal system, I'm going to recommend this video I did about the motor unit, which should break that down. I've also got this nervous system playlist for a bunch of other topics about the nervous system. Otherwise, if this video helped you out, consider subscribing right there. You can also like the video and leave a comment. I also want to give a big shout out to my patrons on Patreon, Diana and Jessica. I appreciate you. Just want to let you know that. Have fun, be good. See you next time.